Williams sisters. Williams sisters. Venus and Serena. Oh, okay, right? The Williams sisters, right? Yeah, tennis. Very, very talented. Very talented. Do you know which one? You probably don't if you didn't know Williams sisters. You don't know which one was older. Older one is Venus. Do you know which one won more awards? I think they're called Grand Slams. Was the younger. So Venus starts off on top. Venus was the first one to go real professional. And then when Serena got a little older, she surpassed Venus. Okay? So those are familiar stories. But most people don't know about the day that Venus asked Serena to help her out in the field and whacked her, killed her. No, that's not how it goes. That's in the Bible. I'm like, oh, should I be telling that joke? Should I be saying that? It's in the Bible. No, we're talking about Cain and Able. But unlike the Serena and Venus, the older did get surpassed by the younger, but didn't get jealous. As far as I know, didn't kill her sister, her sibling, but continued to cheer her on and be on her side. It's sort of a reversal of what we see in the Bible. So what we're going to do today, we are going to finish Genesis 3, and we're going to start Genesis 4. So I don't know if you've ever heard a sermon that actually takes both the beginning and end of those two stories, but it is sort of funny, and one reason I'm doing that is to show that they do form a unit together. There's a lot that Genesis 3 and 4 are communicating to each other in a way. The other reason why I'm doing it is because I'm trying to finish up this series by Christmas time. So we're saying a little more. We're going to stretch here a bit. We're going to cover some real ground today. There's going to be 5 ideas, 5 images we're going to discuss. And for each one of these, the challenge is to see where the riddle might be. Proverbs 1 talks about how it's the wise who are able to solve the riddles. And the Bible is so often written like a puzzle or a riddle. And we see that here again. I've said it before. We see that in these stories where you'll see elements of a story and there may be that first thing that comes to mind, but it's still an invitation. There may be more going on than what you first see. So let's go ahead. Let's open up Genesis 3. Genesis 3. So this is after the lament poem of God. He addresses the serpent, the woman, and the man. Verse 20, the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins and clothed them. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. What is it? Tov and Ra. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. The sentence ends there. Therefore, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way of the tree of life. Bible's weird. That's why there's it's puzzles and riddles. Like, this is weird. The cherubim guarding the way back into the garden. What is happening here? So let's start first about Eve. Eve is the first character here, and Eve gets named. What we're going to notice here is that there is a chiasm between Genesis 2 and 3. If you remember way back when we started the Genesis 2 kind of series, we said there were how many scenes? Just like there were 7 days of creation, there's 7 scenes in the Genesis 2 and 3 story. And so we can see that it forms this mirror image, and you actually can see Genesis 2 and 3 have elements that repeat. So we see Eve getting named twice. Genesis 2, and now here in Genesis 3. We're going to see the idea of them being naked twice. We're going to see being clothed twice, and God stepping in to help. So God making that Ezer the helper, and then God providing clothing. So we see these repeated ideas in Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. Why does Adam name Eve? And the word Eve means living one. We're told right there because she was the mother of all living. So if you are making a guess and you're saying because Eve is going to be the mother of all living, you're right. You're absolutely right. You get partial credit. But if you want full credit, you look a little deeper. Why does Adam name his wife living one at this time? I think there's an intentional ambiguity here. Because on the one hand, yes, she's going to give birth to humanity. She's going to be really important to populating the earth. On the other hand, notice that the word life shows up so much more in this passage. It shows up like 3 more times. And every time it shows up, it's talking about what they don't have, what they're going to be banished away from, so that they won't eat from the tree of life, so that they won't live forever. And so there's an irony here. I think the name of Eve isn't just pointing to a future hope that there will be a seed. In particular, we already read that the seed of the woman is going to be really important in the story of the Bible. So naming Eve living one means that from Eve, we're going to all get life. There's a hope. But then there's also a tragic lament in naming her what they lost by being cut off from the source of life. Represented by a tree, but we're using our imaginations here, and we're like, that tree is just representative of the source of life. We know who the true source of life is. And they were cut off, and they were banished from the garden. So there's a hope and tragedy in this name. As we read on, Eve gets named, and then Eve is the next one to do the naming. Or at least to make some declarations. So if you go to the beginning of chapter 4, now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, the firstborn, saying, I have gotten a man. Is anyone else looking at that? Does anyone have a different translation than I have gotten a man? Brought forth.
I have a male child.
A male child? It's an awkward expression. Both ways it's awkward. The verb gotten or brought forth, it's the idea of creating and now you have some sort of ownership of. So it's a synonym for the word for create. So the previous story, who is the one creating man? God. Now Eve is saying, I made man. Is where you don't say I made a man. You say I made a child, or I conceived, I gave birth to a child. But instead she says, I made a man. She's got a little elevated view of herself here. She may not realize that life really ultimately comes from God. But I mean, she's pretty impressed. I mean, my goodness. Giving birth to a child, like that is very impressive. That's a big deal. But maybe she's got a little more pride than she should have. She does say, with the help of the Lord. Does anyone have any other, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Does any other version say something a little different? With the help?
Mine says, with the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man.
Yeah, I don't think in the original Hebrew the word help is actually there. It's just with the Lord. With the Lord. And so that's the translators trying to make sense of what this weird expression of with the Lord. It might actually be implying this idea of sitting right next to The Lord, so this could be temple language of you set one idol next to another idol. So it could be her again elevating herself a little higher than she really should. One of the reasons why I think that this might be a really subtle way of showing Eve being a little too prideful is if you go to the end of the story and you go to the end of chapter 4, what you would have read is different accounts and the entire chapter 4 being patterned by birth and murder. Birth and murder. So this whole bringing the seed is a big deal, but then we realize that there's going to be conflict. So this is the Genesis 3:15 kind of working out that through your seed there's going to be violence and conflict, and we see it right here: birth and murder. But it ends 25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Doesn't that sound just a little more like she's been through the fire? A little more humble, a little more like you've been wounded, but now you've come to a healthier view of who God is. Instead of saying it's me who made a man, it's now God who appointed, God who brought me Seth. It's this realization. So even in just a couple verses that we can read really fast, and we just skip over, we start to realize, oh, this is a bit of Eve's story, framing the Cain and Able story. And then you read the rest of Genesis, and you're going to see how especially women will angle and will try to manipulate and try to use their ability to conceive and take that into their own hands. And you see a lot of issues and problems started throughout that. You're going to see, just like Eve, who has different sons, and after angling and a little bit of this pride, you're going to see in the same way, you're going to see Rachel and Leah toward the end of the story of Genesis. And they're going to be angling. And they're going to be having conflict over having children. And then you're going to see the older ones jealous of the younger one. You're going to see a replay of Cain and Abel at the end of Genesis. And so to speak, they don't kill Joseph at the end of Genesis, but they do put him into the pit. And the pit is a symbol of death. It's the same in Jonah. When Jonah is swallowed by a fish, he says, I'm in Sheol. I'm in the pit. I'm in the chaos waters. I'm as good as dead here. It's this idea where the same thing gets repeated on. So much more going on than just her name is Eve because she gives birth. So much more. A whole world opens up. That's just one. We'll keep going. There's more. So first thing that happens is Adam names Eve. The next thing that happens is we see God gives Adam and Eve what? Gives them what? What? Did you say clothing? Or is that just what I wanted you to say? You're right. Clothing. He clothes them, which we had seen before. They clothed themselves with the fig leaf. But apparently the fig leaf wasn't doing it. It wasn't good enough. So God says, you're going to need some real skin. So here's, why does God clothe Adam and Eve? The next puzzle. Why does God clothe Adam and Eve? If you said in your head that God clothed Adam and Eve because the fig leaves weren't good enough, you could be right. If you said in your head that God clothing Adam and Eve might be some sort of figure of forgiveness, a figure of God's righteousness, maybe I think you're right there too. This is a theme that runs all throughout the Bible, this idea of being clothed. It's this idea. So the priest had to put on special garments before he could go into the Holy of Holies, which is representative of the Garden of Eden. So as they're getting out of the garden, they're getting clothed. But it's this image of, oh, we're going to need to get clothed if we're going to be able to get back in. And then, you talk about skins. Skins, well, how do you get skin? Is you're going to have to kill an animal. This is the very first physical death in the Bible. Was God's grace to the humans to cover them up. I mean, I don't think it's too many steps to say that this is picturing someone is going to die, something's going to die so that we can be forgiven and brought back into Eden. Want to know something else cool? This is something I'm sure no one's ever heard here. This is new. So skin in Hebrew is or, okay? Do you know what the word light is in Hebrew? We talked about this maybe a year ago in our Sermon on the Mount series. Doubt anyone will remember. I wouldn't have remembered this. But the Hebrew word for light is also or. So skin and light. What happens with Moses when he goes up on Mount Sinai, which is kind of like another Eden place, and he meets with God, he comes down and his face is beaming and radiating light. It's almost like there's a comment here of this idea of being transformed in appearance speaks to this whole humanity needing to be transformed to get back into the garden. So there's something significant when you know the story of Jesus bringing 3 of his disciples up on the mountain and he's transfigured. And there's this light coming from him and his clothes themselves turn white, so white you couldn't even bleach it. There's something transformed as he goes back up on the mountain. It's like Jesus is fulfilling the glory of humanity that we were supposed to have. This transformed, this covering. Just crazy. So much here. Just this one look. But why else would it be here? You think it's here just because they were cold? No! This is seeds and puzzles that are going to be picked up throughout the story of the Bible. And then what happens? Then there's cherubim. Cherubim. Angels at the door, at the exit, at the entrance of this Garden of Eden. And a sword of fire. We talked about this before. Moses, as he goes up Sinai, they get all worried. They start with the calf because they saw him go right through fire. It's this blocking to Eden again. We've talked about this before, that the tabernacle at different entrances had drawn in, or on the curtains, there were cherubim at the different entrances, just like this Garden of Eden. So if you're entering into this heaven on earth space, you might encounter an angel. And in the story of Jacob, you'll actually see, as he leaves the promised land because of his issues with his brother, he goes on exile. When he comes back, there's this little line that he encounters some angels as he's entering back into the promised land. This doorway becomes really important back into this Garden of Eden. Makes sense of why Jesus would call himself, I am the door. I am the door. But the door doesn't just represent getting back into the Garden of Eden, which we see that throughout. We see Lot in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. There's this idea of this door that, if he can get into the doorway, he's safe and there's refuge. In Noah, there's mention of the door separating out and being the place where you can find refuge. And the door needs to shut so that you can be in safety. But then the door actually also comes with another meaning of different choices and options. So it's interesting that in the Cain story, you'll see that sin is also at the door. Sin is crouching at the door. Sin is this animal crouching at the door. So when we see doors, we can think of entering into this heaven on earth space of refuge. We can also think of door as a choice between Tov and Ra. And Jesus picks up on that too. We've talked about that in the Sermon on the Mount. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate. These two different kinds of doors. Whole world here, huh? We've got two more. So, what were the occupations of Cain and Abel? Do you know? We'll start with Cain. Does anyone here know Cain's occupation? Farmer. Okay, Cain was a farmer, and Abel, he was a shepherd. Do we see shepherds throughout the Bible? Are shepherds normally the good guys or the bad guys? Yeah. Any shepherds you know? Let's shout it out. Jesus, I am the good shepherd. Okay, so shepherds are the good people. Yup. Yahweh, the Lord is my shepherd. Sorry? David. Moses. Joseph. I think all the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, I think they all were shepherds. Shepherds. Do you know shepherds had to really trust in God? They didn't really have their own land. They were nomadic more so. The farmers, on the other hand, were the bad guys in the story. The farmers, okay, so here's the thing though. Today, when we think of farmers, we think rural. But in Bible times, they thought of farmers as the city folk because they would gather together. And it was the shepherds who were out in the wilderness. But the farmers were the city people. So I don't know. You're going to have to make a judgment call about what God thinks of farmers today. But I'm not going to make that call. Farmers are also associated with the city people. And so the city people are Cain. Cain builds a city. Nimrod builds a city. He, that's Babylon. The bad guys. Pharaoh is building cities. Bad guys. So we've got not just that they these aren't accidental little commentaries like, just so happened that, Abel was an accountant and, Cain just so happened to be a hairdresser. I don't know. It wasn't just accidental. But these pick up on themes now. And not to say that one is actually bad or another, but they come to represent this thing of shepherds who need to trust in God. But the reason why so many people would build cities, the idea was we're going to build our own Eden. And we're going to protect ourselves. A city in ancient times was always walled in. And so it was this point of security. It's like, I can't trust anyone else. I've got to be my own source of security. And those end up being the bad guys. Now we read, finally, about the offering. So we talked about Eve and her names. And we talked about the clothing and the door and the occupation. Now let's talk about, finally, the offering. Why is God so flippant with these offerings? Why does he like one offering and not another? Let's go ahead. I'll read this, and you tell me if you see anything. In the course of time, this is verse 3, chapter 4. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. So what difference do we have between the two offerings?
Abel brought the first fruits.
The firstborn, yeah. There's this little element that he brought the best. And maybe God just appreciates a good barbecue. I don't Probably not. I think that's it. I think it's there. Because what do we see? Cain brought an offering, the fruit of the ground. Maybe there's something about the ground was cursed. I don't know. But it just says the fruit of the ground versus Abel, who brought the firstborn of his flock. There's a difference. Now there is a difference, but the Lord had regard or favored Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. Okay, does God banish Cain further east because his offering wasn't good enough? No. Does God strike him dead? No. Does God reject Cain? No. All it says is that he had favor. He really liked Abel's offering, but he didn't quite so much like Cain's offering. Then he has this conversation with Cain, and he says, if you do tov, it'll go well with you. It's like God's giving this invitation, like, you have more to give. You can do better. It's okay. You don't need to get jealous and angry. You can give a little more. I think that's what's going on here. I don't think it's arbitrary. Sometimes I read the Bible and I'm like, is that just random? Is it just like, I mean, it seems like they both brought what they could based off of what position of life they were in, but I think God saw something else. I think he saw an extra deliberate sacrifice made by Abel. And I think that's a good place for us to stop on. What kind of offering are you giving? It's just such a simple, all of it just so condensed. These things don't tell us outright, but if you read it slow enough, it just makes sense that one offering was good. It was even the first offering. Cain got the ball rolling. But Abel brought something that was the best. It's this little thing of, well, what about me? Am I bringing God my best? When it comes to my family, when it comes to my daily life, am I loving my family with my firstborn fat portion or just a little bit of fruit? Am I working in my job with the firstborn fat portion or just a little bit of fruit? As I pursue God and I try to spend time with God and I worship God, do I worship him with the best of me or just something? God's looking for, maybe from some of us to bring a little bit better, a little bit more. And he gives this gentle invitation. He says, if you do what is told, if you do what is good and right, it'll go well with you. Let's pray. Now, in view of God's mercy, let's offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy